speaking there. The Labour leader Ed Miliband says there is an alternative to the government's spending cuts. But what is it? And can protests actually influence government policy in this country? To discuss this, I'm joined by Mark Littlewood, the Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Paul Brandon, Chair of the Right to Work campaign. Just to begin at the very beginning, I'd like you briefly to set out, if you would, what is your position on spending cuts? Is the pace right or not?
I'd actually like the pace to be even faster. And to put some numbers into perspective, the coalition government will, over the next 4 or 5 years, spend £600 billion more on public spending than it brings in on tax receipts. We will still be adding to the overall national debt. In total, the cuts over this Parliament will amount to about 3.5% in real terms.
OK, Mark, that's your view. Paul, what's your take on this?
Well, it's completely the opposite. The cuts aren't necessary at all. As we've seen today, the banner that led the march today was that cuts are not the cure, and the reason for that is because there is an alternative. Today was a march for that alternative, and that alternative is to tackle tax avoidance. It's to try and grow our way out of any problems that we've got. But also, I think today what we've seen on the streets of London is the Labour movement striking back in the strongest way possible and taking to the streets and actually saying, do you know what? What we're going to do is that we're going to have our say here, and we're not going to pay for a crisis that we didn't create. We want bankers, we want other people, we want some of the richest in society to start paying their way.
Paul, I'll just interrupt you there. You're talking about growing our way out of this, but surely, yes, growth is all very well, but you've also got to pay off your debts too.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned about paying off your debts. There's an interesting statistic that since the Second World War, the percentage of debt that we have to GDP compared to, say, in the 1940s, 50s and 60s is considerably lower, and during that time we built the NHS, we created the welfare state and comprehensive education. And I have to say that, you know, if we keep that in mind, then actually how necessary are the cuts at all, and what is actually behind what the government's doing? And I would suggest it's a particular agenda.
If you look at our off-balance sheet liabilities as well, the country's about £5 trillion in debt. That's about £78,000 for every man, woman and child in the country. And I think there's an immorality here, that we are spending money on ourselves today and basically sending the bill to our children to pay off somewhere down the line. That's not acceptable. And the entire strategy of tax high, regulate high, spend even more than you're bringing in has now been tested to destruction. If we continue down that path, you only need to look over to Lisbon to see what the outcome is.
One of the protesters said today, you know, we're going to carry on fighting till they hear us. And Paul, the government may well hear what people said today, what the main thrust of the argument was. But the fact is, it's not really going to influence or change government policy in any way, is it?
Well, I think what the march will do today is that all those people who've come from workplaces across the country, they'll go back to those workplaces. You know, mainly it was trade unionists of this country gathered together in London, and they'll take that back to their workplaces. And they'll organise for strike actions against the cuts, and they'll defend this attack on public services, the welfare state, the NHS. And I think that's something that the Labour movement needs to get fully behind, is some sort of coordinated strike action, you know, some form of general strike that actually says, no, we're not going to pay for this crisis. It's not a crisis we've created. This is a bankers' created crisis, and why should we have to pay the price?
Mark, Brendan Barber of the TUC was saying earlier today, you know, about the people out in the streets, this is Middle England. Do you think that this is Middle England? And if it is, David Cameron ought to be getting a little bit worried about that strength of feeling. I
don't think it is Middle England. It's the perfect right of these people to protest, and I can understand why people are worried.
Who are they then?
Well, largely people who are working in the public sector. Most opinion polls show that about 67% of the electorate think that these cuts are necessary. It's the perfect right of the other 33% to protest. But they won't be listened to here, and I haven't understood yet what the alternative is. We cannot keep spending. There is not some magic money fairy who can pay for all of this stuff. We have taxed British business to the absolute maximum. The banking crisis exacerbated a problem that the government was already causing by spending far, far too much money. And we've got to nurse our business back to health, because it is the private sector that generates growth in the economy.
So you think it's not a case of David Cameron ignoring them at his peril?
I don't think it is. The coalition government has set a course. I would like it to actually pursue that course even faster and to have a more robust policy on it. But there is no plan B here. The coalition is only going to pursue plan A.
So, Paul, just beyond giving people an opportunity to vent their frustration and to make clear their point of view, I mean, really, what was the point of today's rally. Beyond what you said, them going back to their communities and perhaps organising strike action.
Well,
I mean, is it really going to make a difference?
Well, it's to put forward some alternative ideas as well. I mean, the Robin Hood tax, I saw today people dressed as Robin Hood on the march. You know, it's to put that point that, you know, if the bankers should be paying for this crisis, you know, and then we can have this Robin Hood tax that will tackle speculation. You know, there are all sorts of ideas floating around. There's land value taxation. There is even corporation tax, for example. I mean, to say that somehow we are taxing the businesses of this company to the hill, I think is remarkable, because if you look at the budget this very week, 2% was taken off corporation tax. You know, we're not all in this together, are we? You know, that's the big problem. That's why you've had
companies that are going to create growth.
But that's why you've had, well, the people who create growth, the people who create wealth, are the workers on the shop floor and the factories of this country.
The private sector.
Oh, they're the people who create wealth, though.
There's no wealth creation in the public sector.
Well, what we need to do is start sharing out. We need to start sharing out the wealth that is actually being created by the people who create it, not, you know, to somehow this notion that there are this, you know, paternalism that exists within society.
We need to incentivise wealth creation, don't we? We really want new businesses growing up in country, entrepreneurs, the private sector, all of it. No wealth is created in the public sector.
Well, you say that to people who work in shops, in factories, in warehouses of this country. They're the people, but they're the people. They're not entrepreneurs. They're the people on the shop floor. They're the people who work day in, day out, increasingly longer hours, and you want to take your pensions away from us and all the rest of it.
More of those businesses growing up, that's what we need. That's the private sector, right?
They're the people who create the wealth, and they're the ones who should share in it.
We could listen to this for much longer, but I'm afraid we do have to leave it there. A very interesting discussion. Mark Littlewood and Paul Brandon, thank you very much.